They called it gift. That's what made it worse. A tiny slip of paper tossed across the table like an afterthought, like I was something to be pitied, not celebrated. Everyone laughed, except me. I smiled, sure, but something in my chest pulled tight, like a string being yanked from the inside. And while the cameras weren't rolling yet, while the world still saw us as a happy family, the truth had already begun to rot beneath the surface. No raised voices, no slammed doors, just that quiet kind of cruelty wrapped in ribbons and grins, the kind that makes you question everything you meant to people who once called you their own. I kept quiet, but silence has a way of building pressure. And when it breaks, it doesn't whisper, it roars. If you've ever stood there, holding on to dignity with bloody fingers while the people you raised rewrote the story without you, this one's for you. Feel like if you know how betrayal feels when it wears perfume and hugs you goodnight. Subscribe if you believe truth doesn't need to scream to be heard. And tell me below, where are you watching from? And how do you rebuild when home no longer means safe? I woke up early that morning, earlier than usual for a Sunday. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, opened the blinds to let in the warm June sunlight, and sat in my usual chair at the kitchen table. I bought a small ham, mashed potatoes, green beans, and everything I needed to cook the meal myself, just like I used to when Tessa was little. Back then, Father's Day had meant handmade cards, sticky hugs, and maybe burnt toast on a paper plate, proudly delivered by a 6-year-old with paint still on her fingers. I hadn't gotten one of those in years, but I still cooked like I was expecting her to. I even brought out the good plates. I wanted everything to be just right, just in case she remembered what today was supposed to mean. At noon sharp, the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened it to see Tessa standing there with her husband Evan, and behind them, dressed in a crisp white linen shirt and mirrored sunglasses, was Gerald, Evan's father. I hadn't invited him. I hadn't expected him, but I said nothing. Tessa kissed me on the cheek quickly and walked in like she owned the place. "Smells good, Dad," she said. I smiled, told her it would be ready soon, and led them to the dining room where I'd already set the table. Gerald looked around with the thinly veiled judgment of a man used to marble countertops and catered meals. Evan said nothing, just nodded like he was clocking in at work. We ate, and for a while it was tolerable. I did my best to smile through the small talk, through Gerald's stories about his Mediterranean real estate investments, through Tessa's subtle complaints about traffic, daycare, and how Evan's schedule had been so busy lately. And then came the moment that, for me, split the room wide open. Tessa stood and clapped her hands. "Gift time," she said cheerfully. "Dad, yours first." She reached in her bag, pulled something out, and tossed it across the table. I caught it before it landed in the mashed potatoes. A lottery ticket, a $2 Powerball, crumpled like a receipt. "If you win," she said, grinning, "remember half is mine." I looked down at the ticket in my hand, blinked, and looked back up at her. I forced a smile. "Very thoughtful," I said. "Just a little fun," she replied. "Don't be so serious." Then she turned toward Gerald, her eyes lighting up in a way I hadn't seen since she was a teenager begging for a car. "Now for the real gift," she said. She bent down and picked up an elegant gift box with gold ribbon, so thick and glossy it looked like it had been tied by professionals. She set it in front of Gerald like he was royalty. "Gerald," she said sweetly, "thank you for everything you've done for our family. We wanted you to have something special." Gerald undid the ribbon with exaggerated slowness. When he opened the box, 2 gold-embossed cruise tickets shimmered in the light. 2 weeks in the Mediterranean, Tessa said proudly. "Private balcony, all meals included. First class." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "Cost us 13 grand," she added, like she was announcing a prize. Gerald chuckled. "Now this is what I call a Father's Day gift," he said. Your daughter is a gem, Harold. Raise her well. My throat tightened. I looked at Tessa. She didn't even glance at me. Some people show love through meaningful gifts, she said, throwing a look my way. Others, she shrugged, while they try. Evan laughed. Gerald laughed. I laughed too, because I didn't know what else to do. That lottery ticket sat in front of me, a joke gift from a daughter who had just dropped $13,000 on another man. I didn't know then that she'd use my money to do it. I'd never been careless with money. When you spend most of your life fixing cars, skipping vacations, and patching up your own roof instead of paying someone else, frugality becomes muscle memory. But as I scrolled down the list of recent transactions, my eyes caught on something that didn't belong. Premier Travel Services $13,648.73. The words blinked at me from the screen like a warning light on a dashboard. I blinked again, convinced I'd misread. But the number didn't change. The date matched 3 days prior, a Thursday. I hadn't been anywhere near a travel agency. My heart began to pound as I opened the detailed view, praying there was some kind of mistake, some clerical error, maybe even a hack. But as the payment details loaded, my stomach dropped. The billing address matched mine. The card used was mine. The authorized user was listed as Tessa B. It hit me like a wrench to the chest. I had completely forgotten that, years ago after her mother passed, I'd added Tessa to my account just in case. In case of emergencies, I told myself. In case something happened to me, so she could access the funds for funeral costs or to keep the house running. I had never imagined she'd use it to buy another man a luxury cruise behind my back. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached for the phone. I stared at her name in my contacts, thumb hovering, hesitating. Part of me wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she had a good reason. Maybe she meant to pay me back. Maybe she just hadn't thought it through. But deep down, I already knew. When the call connected and she answered with that same breezy, distracted voice, the one she used when she was busy with something more important than me, I knew. "Hey, Dad, everything okay?" she asked, as though nothing at all had happened. "Tessa," I said, keeping my tone calm, measured, too calm maybe. "I'm looking at my bank statement. There's a charge here. Over $13,000. Premier Travel Services." There was a pause, brief but sharp. Then came the laugh. Light, casual, dismissive. "Oh, that. Yeah, I used your account to book Gerald's cruise." Surprise. "You used my account?" I repeated, my voice hollow. "Well, yeah. You don't ever use it for anything. It was just sitting there. And Gerald's done so much for us. He really deserves something nice for once." I couldn't speak for a moment. I just stared at the table, at the small faded ring where her mother's coffee cup used to sit every morning, remembering the years of work it took to build that savings, to make sure I never had to be a burden to anyone. "Tessa," I said slowly, "you didn't even ask me." "It's not a big deal," she replied, her voice sharpening now, moving from casual to defensive. "It's family money, Dad. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is ours. That's how family works. You've always said we help each other, right?" "That's not helping, Tessa," I said, my voice shaking now, but not from rage, from disbelief. "That's stealing." "Don't be dramatic," she snapped. "It's not stealing when it's between family. Gerald helped us buy our house. He pays Jake's private school tuition. He covers our country club dues. The man has done more for this family than you have in years." I swallowed hard. That hurt, more than I wanted to admit. "I worked double shift to pay for your college," I said quietly. "I fixed cars until my back gave out, so you'd never have to worry about student debt. I skipped vacations, holidays, even doctor's appointments, so you'd have everything you needed. And Gerald helped us move beyond that," she said, her voice cold, like she was explaining something obvious to a child. "He showed us what success looks like. You're stuck in the past, Dad. I'm just trying to build a better future." I sat there, the phone pressed to my ear, My free hand curled into a fist so tight my knuckles ached. This wasn't just about the money. It was about everything. The years I'd spent thinking I was raising a daughter who respected me. The thousands of sacrifices I'd made without complaint. The belief that love and loyalty actually meant something. "I'm your father," I said, barely above a whisper. "Not Gerald. Me." There was silence on the other end. My daughter had stolen from me, justified it, and dismissed it all in less than 5 minutes. And now, all I could do was sit with that truth and figure out how the hell it had come to this. I stood and walked to the living room, turned on the lamp with the faded shade, and sat in the recliner where I used to rock Tessa to sleep. Back when she had colic, and I would hum her favorite lullaby until her tiny body finally relaxed in my arms. Back when being her father felt like the most important thing in the world. The silence in the house now felt like an echo of all those years. Only instead of the soft breaths of a sleeping child, I had nothing but the memory of her voice telling me that Gerald had done more for her than I ever did. I looked around at the pictures still hanging on the walls, framed moments of birthdays, school plays, and holidays long gone. There was the one of her in her high school cap and gown, smiling so wide you'd think nothing in the world could ever go wrong. I remembered that day clearly. How I'd woken up at 5 in the morning to iron her robe, how I'd packed a lunch to eat in the stands so I could save money for the family dinner afterward. I'd taken that photo with pride swelling in my chest, thinking maybe, just maybe, I'd done something right. But somewhere between that day and this one, something had broken. I picked up the phone again. I didn't want to call her, but I needed to hear her voice one more time. Needed to believe this was a misunderstanding or a moment of stress she'd apologize for. Maybe she'd realize what she'd said. Maybe she'd take it back. The phone rang 4 times before she answered. "Dad?" she said, her tone already impatient. "What now?" "I just wanted to talk," I said softly. "After what you said earlier, I needed to say something." "Dad, I'm really busy. Can this wait?" "No," I said, firmer now. "Tessa, I raised you. I worked myself to the bone so you could have a better life. I skipped everything so you wouldn't have to. I gave up vacations, new cars, even heating in the winter so you could go to college without a cent of debt. I've lived small so you could live big. Does that mean nothing to you?" There was a pause on the other end. Then she said it, not with anger, not with cruelty, but with a kind of coldness that froze me where I Saturday, "You did what a father is supposed to do. You raised me. That was your job. Gerald did more than that. He invested in us. He built something for our future. You just maintained." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Every word of hers hit me like a sledgehammer. Not because they were loud or cruel, but because they were delivered with the same flat tone someone might use to describe the weather. My sacrifices weren't invisible to her. They were irrelevant. "Is that really how you see it?" I finally managed. "All those years, all that work." "Look," she sighed, "I know you mean well, but honestly, Gerald's helped us more in the past 5 years than you have since I graduated. He paid for Jake's private school. He helped us get our house. He connects us with people who matter. That's real support, Dad. Not just working yourself into the ground fixing cars. So the fact that I did those things for you, that I made sure you never had to go hungry, that doesn't count?" "It counts," she said, "but it's not enough anymore." "Not enough for what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "For the life we're trying to build," she replied. "You chose your path. Gerald's showing us another one. One that actually leads somewhere." "I thought I was leading you somewhere," I whispered. "You were," she said, "but we're not there anymore." And then she hung up again. I stared at the phone, stunned into silence. I set it down carefully, stood up, and walked back into the kitchen where the lottery ticket still sat on the table. The irony hit me with a sick kind of humor. This ticket, this gesture, had been bought with the same money she'd stolen from me to buy Gerald that cruise. So in essence, She'd used my money to throw me a bone and call a gift. I turned it over again, stared at the front, and tried to imagine the version of her that had once colored cards for me in crayon. Where had that little girl gone? Where had I gone wrong? I stood slowly and walked to the trash can, lifting the lid and tossing the ticket inside without ceremony. It landed with a soft rustle, settling into the coffee grounds and banana peels like it belonged there. I stared at the bin for a second, wondering if I'd feel some dramatic sense of closure, but I didn't. I just felt small. The walls of the kitchen felt tighter than usual, like they were pressing in. I needed air. I grabbed my jacket, not because it was cold, but because it gave me something to do with my hands, and I stepped outside. The screen door creaked like it always did, and for once, I didn't care to fix it. I walked down the porch steps, my feet finding the sidewalk I habit. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across Maple Street. This was the same street I'd pushed Tessa's stroller down when she was 6 months old, the same street where she'd learned to ride her bike while I jogged alongside her, ready to catch her if she fell. I passed the Hendersons' house, where their grandkids were playing in the yard, chasing each other with foam swords and plastic shields. Their laughter floated through the air, light and real, and it stung more than I expected. I smiled weakly at Mrs. Henderson as she waved from her porch. She looked like she was going to say something, but then she just smiled and nodded instead. Maybe she sensed something. Maybe she didn't want to pry. I turned the corner and kept walking. Every house on this block held a piece of my life. That was where Tessa had her first sleepover, where she lost her front tooth on a trampoline, where I'd helped a neighbor fix their fence just because it felt like the right thing to do. It all felt like a different lifetime now. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out without thinking. A text from Tessa lit up the screen. "We'll pay you back. Maybe by Christmas." Okay, that was it. No apology. No regret. Just a sentence that felt more like a brush off than any kind of promise. I stared at the message, reread it 3 times, and finally locked the phone without replying. What was there to say? That she didn't get it? That she didn't see how deeply she'd hurt me? That she had reduced my entire life's work to an ATM withdrawal she didn't even think required permission? I walked for another 20 minutes before turning around, the air growing cooler, the sky darkening into a dull blue. When I got home, the house was exactly as I'd left it, still too quiet, still filled with the ghost of a family that used to be whole. I tossed my jacket over the chair, poured myself a glass of water, and stood in the kitchen for a moment, staring down at the trash can. I don't know what I expected, that the ticket would have vanished, maybe, but it was still there, half buried under an old apple core. I didn't touch it. I wasn't superstitious. I didn't believe in fate or omens or destiny. But for some reason, that ticket unsettled me. It wasn't about the money. The sky outside was already bright, but the air in the house felt stale, like it hadn't been breathed in properly for years. I sat down at the kitchen table, avoiding the trash can where I knew the lottery ticket still lay buried. I didn't want to look at it. I didn't want to look at anything. But when I opened my laptop to check the weather, I found myself staring at something much worse than a forecast. My browser was still open to the bank page from the day before, but in another tab, Facebook had auto-loaded. I hadn't meant to click it. I rarely checked social media anyway. But there it was, flashing new notifications. My name, tagged. I clicked before I could stop myself. Tessa had made a post, and it had already gathered dozens of likes and comments. Her profile picture showed her and Evan on a sailboat, both smiling, sun-drenched, and perfect. The post read, "It breaks my heart to say this, but sometimes the people who raise us don't always stay the people we can count on. My father has decided to cut me off completely from the resources that were always part of our family's shared security. After years of me caring for him, handling his affairs, and being there through the hardest times, he's now accusing me of theft for doing what I've always done, help support our family. It's painful, but I needed to speak up. My mouth went dry. My heart thudded in my chest, not from anger at first, but disbelief. I scrolled down, reading comment after comment from people I barely knew or hadn't seen in years. "I'm so sorry you're dealing with this, Tessa. You're such a good daughter. Your father is lucky to have you, even if he doesn't realize it. Elderly people can get so paranoid about money. Don't take it personally." The room spun. I refreshed the page, hoping maybe it would change, hoping maybe it would vanish. But no, she had posted it publicly. She had taken what she did, unauthorized use of my savings to buy another man a vacation, and turned it into a story of martyrdom. I stood up, knocking my chair back. My stomach was in knots. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, needing to breathe, needing to clear my head. I made it 2 blocks before I realized people were watching me. It wasn't overt, just sideways glances, awkward pauses in conversations, quick shifts in posture when they saw me coming. At the grocery store, the cashier who usually greeted me with a cheerful, "Hey," Mr. Bennett barely made eye contact. She bagged my eggs and bread quickly, muttering a quiet, "Have a good one," before turning to the next customer without waiting for a reply. I walked home slower, my shoulders hunched, my thoughts racing. She had made me into a villain with a single post, and it was spreading like wildfire. Neighbors who once borrowed my tools or asked for help with their gutters were now watching me like I was dangerous, like I was some miser hoarding money out of spite. When I got home, I sat down in the living room and stared at the framed photos on the shelf. Pictures of birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings where Tessa smiled with the kind of joy that used to feel real. I wondered if she remembered those days the same way I did, or if she had rewritten all of it to fit the narrative she now broadcasted online. That afternoon, I received a call from Margaret, my sister. Her voice was tight, cautious. "Harold," she said, "I just saw what Tessa posted. Are you okay?" "Not really," I said. "It's all lies, Margaret. Every word of it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she sighed. "I figured as much. But you know how things look from the outside. She's making it sound like you've lost it. I'm not the one who emptied someone else's account without asking." "I know," she said, "but not everyone does. People see what they want to see, especially when it comes with a pretty photo and a sad story." I thanked her for calling, even though the conversation left me feeling more alone. That night, I made the mistake of checking Facebook again. The post had over 200 reactions now. Strangers chimed in, adding their 2 cents about how parents can be controlling, how money changes people, how sad it is when children are punished for trying to help. Evan had even added a comment. "We've always done what's best for the family." It's unfortunate that some people twist love into accusations. I turned on the set without paying much attention, flipping past news channels discussing political scandals and cooking shows demonstrating dishes I'd never make, until I landed on a familiar, almost cheerful face. The state lottery drawing was about to start, and for some reason, I didn't change the channel. Maybe I needed a distraction, something so far removed from my own world that it couldn't possibly sting. Maybe some small part of me remembered the ticket I'd tossed out in disgust, the ticket bought with my own stolen money, handed to me like a joke. The announcer's voice rang out through the quiet house, overly enthusiastic and full of ceremony. "Tonight's Powerball jackpot has rolled over once again, bringing us to an incredible grand prize of $120 million, he said, smiling at the camera as if he were delivering good news to the entire world. I shook my head, sipping cold coffee and staring blankly at the screen as the first number appeared, 7. I frowned, a flicker of recognition nudging the back of my mind. The next number was 14, then 23. I sat up a little. The fourth number was 35. My heart stuttered. 42 came next, and the Powerball, 18. I stared at the screen as the numbers repeated. I grabbed the nearest piece of mail, an old envelope, and jotted them down just to be sure. 7, 14, 23, 35, 42, and 18. My brain felt sluggish, like it hadn't caught up to what I was doing. But somewhere, beneath the exhaustion and the hurt and the shame, something else was waking up. A spark, a memory. That ticket, the one she tossed across the table, the one I threw away. I shot up from my chair, knocking the coffee mug to the floor where it shattered across the linoleum and rushed into the kitchen. My hands shook as I ripped the lid off the trash can and stared down into the mess. Coffee grounds, eggshells, paper towels, and there, something crumpled, soggy, and stained. I reached down without hesitation, my fingers digging through the refuse until they closed around the ticket. I pulled it out, my breath catching in my throat. I wiped it gently with a paper towel, the numbers still clearly visible despite the mess. And there they were, all of them. Every single number matched. I leaned against the counter, the room spinning around me. I read the numbers again and again, even though I already knew what I was seeing. I whispered them aloud like a prayer, like a mantra, like I needed to speak them into truth. It didn't feel real. Not after the week I'd had. Not after the betrayal, the public shaming, the loneliness that had crept in and made itself a permanent guest in my home. But it was real. $120 million. And the ticket was mine. Bought with my money. Tossed at me like garbage. Laughed over. Forgotten. I carried it to the sink and gently washed off the worst of the grime, my hands moving with care like I was handling something sacred. I laid it flat on a clean towel and stared at it, still half convinced I was hallucinating. My breath came in shallow, uneven gasps, and I had to sit down at the table just to keep from collapsing. My chest hurt, not in the sharp, panicked way that suggested something medical, but in the deep, overwhelming way that only comes when life takes a sharp, unexplainable turn. I reached for my phone and called the lottery hotline, following the automated prompts with mechanical focus. The robot voice confirmed the winning numbers, the jackpot amount, and instructions on how to claim it. I hung up, sat back in my chair, and covered my face with both hands. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I didn't move. For a long time, I just sat there. The same kitchen that had witnessed my heartbreak now held something else entirely. Hope, maybe, or power, or revenge. I didn't know yet. All I knew was that I was holding something that had the potential to rewrite everything. I stayed awake all night, checking and rechecking the ticket, memorizing the numbers like they were scripture. I couldn't sleep, not with my mind spinning around what came next. Should I tell anyone? Should I wait for Tessa to find out some other way? I drove in silence to the Ohio Lottery Commission office, parked in the visitor lot, and walked in with my head down and shoulders tense. The building was far more modern than I expected, all steel beams and wide windows, and the people inside looked like they belonged in bank advertisements, polished, smiling, efficient. A woman named Janet greeted me, guided me through a series of forms, and took the ticket with practiced care as she ran it through multiple verification scans. "This looks good," she said, her voice warm and steady. "Standard protocol requires a 48-hour holding period for major jackpots. You'll receive a call once it's cleared security review." I thanked her, returned home, and sat at the kitchen table, numb, still unsure if it was real. I had every intention of keeping it quiet until then. But fate, as always, had other plans. Less than a day later, I was stirring scrambled eggs on the stove when I heard tires screech into my driveway. Before I could get to the window, the front door flew open, slamming against the wall with a force that made the floorboards tremble. Tessa stormed in, her face flushed with fury, her eyes wide with panic and entitlement rolled into one. "Dad," she shouted, "what the hell did you do?" I turned off the stove, wiped my hands on a towel, and faced her calmly. "Good morning, Tessa." She ignored the pleasantry, waving her phone in my face. You won the lottery. Don't lie. My friend's cousin works at the commission. She saw your name come through the system. It's all over their internal group chat. I sighed. I did. Yes. She gaped, then pointed an accusing finger. That was my ticket. I gave it to you. You promised half. You tossed it at me across the table, I said evenly. As a joke, after giving Gerald a $13,000 cruise using money you stole from my account. I didn't steal, she shrieked. It was family money, and everyone heard me say it. If you win, half is mine. That's a verbal agreement. That holds up in court. You also said you bought the ticket, I replied. You didn't. You used my money to buy both the cruise and the ticket. You're demanding half of something I already owned. Her jaw clenched. This isn't happening. You're not doing this to me. You can't. Tessa, I said softly, you already did this to me. She paced the living room like a trapped animal, muttering to herself before spinning around and saying, You'll regret this. I'll sue. I'll take you to court. Everyone will know what kind of bitter old man you really are. She stormed out as abruptly as she came, slamming the door behind her. I stood frozen, the sound of her threats echoing through the house. Not even an hour later, my phone lit up with notifications. She had posted another Facebook update, this time with a photo of me from last Christmas, looking tired and unsmiling beneath a string of lights. Her caption read, After everything I've done for him, managing his bills, handling his grief after mom died, being there every week, my father has decided to keep $120 million for himself. The ticket was a gift for me. He promised half. Now he says I don't deserve a penny. Is this what gratitude looks like? The comments exploded. Friends of hers, people I barely remembered, piled on with sympathy. This is elder abuse in reverse. He should be ashamed. Lawyers, get one now. The backlash was instant. The quiet pity that had followed her first post transformed into public outrage. Then Gerald joined in. He made a post on LinkedIn of all places, a polished write-up filled with corporate language and veiled jabs. Witnessing financial elder abuse is heartbreaking, but so is watching respected parents weaponize money to punish their children. The lottery ticket my daughter gifted her father was given in good faith with shared understanding. What followed is a cautionary tale of what unchecked greed can do to a family. Within hours, dozens of professionals in Gerald's network shared and commented, treating it like a case study in ethics. Their version of events, dressed in just enough truth to pass for fact, was spreading faster than anything I could say. My name was being dragged through the digital mud, twisted and reshaped until even I wouldn't have recognized the person they described. I sat at the table in the same chair where I'd eaten every meal for the past 20 years and watched the circus unfold on my screen. I didn't respond. I didn't comment. I didn't post a single word. But inside I burned. Not with rage, with determination. I knew the truth, and I had proof. I still had the receipt from the store where the ticket was purchased. I still had the bank statement showing her unauthorized withdrawal. I still had witnesses from that dinner who remembered her tossing the ticket like garbage and laughing about it. But more than that, I had the knowledge that this wasn't just about money. This was about respect, about the years I'd spent being her father when no one else could be, about the dignity I'd clung to even as she tried to strip it away. She might have turned public opinion for now, but I knew that the truth had its own gravity, and eventually it would pull the lies apart. That night, I didn't cook dinner. I didn't turn on the TV. I sat in silence, staring at the framed picture of my late wife on the mantel, her smile gentle and wise. I sat up straighter in bed, suddenly more awake than I'd been in days. Gerald's father, the man I'd seen maybe twice before, always dressed like he was headed to a board meeting, always walking like he expected the world to part for him. I cleared my throat. Mr. Langston, I'm not sure what there is to talk about. On the contrary, he said, there's quite a bit. I was at your home on Father's Day. I witnessed the gift exchange. I heard every word. My mind jolted. I hadn't realized he was even paying attention. He'd sat at the end of the table, saying very little, sipping his wine and watching the whole ordeal unfold like a man observing chess pieces rather than family members. I'd like to meet in person, he said. Today, if possible. Murphy's Diner. Noon. Then, without waiting for agreement, he hung up. I stared at the phone in my hand, unsure whether to feel cornered or curious. I got up, dressed carefully in my usual flannel shirt and clean jeans, and left the house with the kind of caution that came from being publicly humiliated. As I drove through town, I noticed the same sideways glances, the same tension from people who once waved without hesitation. I parked outside Murphy's, a tiny corner diner with checkered floors and vinyl booths that hadn't changed since the 80s. Inside, Walter was already seated at a booth by the window, dressed in a dark blazer, sipping black coffee. He stood when I entered, offered his hand, and gestured for me to sit. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice still low but deliberate. "I wanted to speak with you before things get further out of hand." "I'd say they're already out of hand," I replied. "Your son and my daughter have made sure of that." Walter didn't flinch. He set down his cup and folded his hands on the table. "I saw everything that day. I saw your daughter hand you that ticket like it was a punchline. I saw her boast about Gerald's cruise. I saw the look on your face." He paused. "It was a gift. No conditions. No agreements. And I will not let them ruin your life with lies." I blinked. "Why would you help me?" Walter's expression darkened, just slightly. "Because I'm ashamed of my son, and because truth still matters." He pulled out his phone, tapped a few buttons, then handed it to me. On the screen was a drafted Facebook post. As a guest at the Bennett home this past Father's Day, it began, "I personally witnessed the moment Tessa handed her father a lottery ticket and declared it his gift. There was no discussion of shared winnings, no agreement, no conditions. What followed has been a campaign of falsehoods that I cannot in good conscience ignore." I read the post twice, barely breathing. "You're really going to post this?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "I built my career on integrity. Gerald has forgotten what that means. It's time he remembered." He clicked post before I could say anything else. Within minutes, the notifications on his phone started buzzing. Likes, comments, shares. His words carried weight, and people knew it. "This will change things," he said, standing and sliding a business card across the table. "If they try anything legal, call me. I'll testify." I watched him leave the diner, walking tall and unbothered. I sat there for a while longer, sipping my own coffee and watching the online tide start to turn. The comments were different this time, more measured, some even apologetic. If Walter Langston says it, I believe it. This sheds a whole new light on the situation. Sounds like that poor man's daughter tried to swindle him. I left the diner feeling like I had finally exhaled after days of suffocating under public scrutiny. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table and reopened my laptop. The notifications were still pouring in, but now they were mixed. Friends of mine who hadn't said a word before were liking Walter's post. Some even messaged me directly, offering their support, their confusion, or just saying they were sorry for jumping to conclusions. I didn't respond to any of them. I didn't need to. For the first time in days, I felt like I didn't have to defend myself. Walter's post did that for me. I walked to the mantel and looked at the family photos again. The same pictures that had once filled me with pride now seemed like frozen lies, captured in better times when I still believed Tessa loved me unconditionally. But now, even as my heart ached with that loss, I felt something else, relief. I had been seen. Someone had finally seen what happened and told the truth, and that truth was starting to cut through the fog of Tessa's performance. That night, I slept soundly for the first time since the numbers matched. No tossing, no staring at the ceiling, no wondering if the world would ever believe me again. I woke early, made pancakes for no one, and ate them at the table while reading Walter's post again, just to remind myself I wasn't crazy. I sat with the letter for a few minutes, weighing my options while the silence of my home folded around me like a heavy blanket. Every instinct told me to keep things quiet, to take the check, disappear, and rebuild my life without another headline. But then I thought about Tessa's posts, Gerald's statements, Evan's smug comment threads, and all the neighbors who stopped waving. I thought about the cashier who used to call me Mr. B like we were old pals, now barely able to make eye contact. And I thought about Walter, a man I barely knew, who had put his name and reputation on the line to tell the truth when my own daughter wouldn't. No, this wasn't just about the money anymore. This was about reclaiming my name, my dignity, and my right to live out the rest of my days with peace. So I checked the box marked public ceremony and mailed the reply. On the morning of the presentation, I ironed the only good shirt I had left, one I'd originally bought for my wife's funeral years ago, and paired it with a navy blazer I hadn't worn in over a decade. As I shaved, I looked at myself in the mirror, seeing the lines, the gray at the temples, the permanent crease between my brows, but also something steadier than I remembered: resolve. I arrived at the Columbus headquarters early. The lobby buzzed with quiet energy. Staff members milled around with clipboards. News crews adjusted their tripods, and local reporters rehearsed their opening lines. One of the officials, a young woman named Janet who had helped me verify the ticket, met me with a firm handshake and led me to a waiting room where I sipped water and tried not to fidget. "We'll call you out in about 5 minutes," she said, glancing at her tablet. "Everything's ready." I nodded, heart beating a little faster now. As I sat there, staring at the official documents on the table beside me, I felt a sudden shift in the energy of the room. I heard voices, footsteps, then one unmistakable sound. The sharp, high-pitched voice of my daughter, Tessa. "You can't keep me out. That's my ticket. I have a right to be here," she said, loud enough for everyone in the hallway to hear. I stood and opened the door slightly to see her pushing past a security guard, her cheeks flushed, hair disheveled like she had rushed out the door without finishing her makeup. Gerald was behind her, trying to smooth things over with the staff, flashing his polished smile and gesturing like a man used to talking his way into exclusive rooms. "Ma'am, you'll need to step back," one of the security staff said. "This is a closed presentation for confirmed guests." "He's my father," she shouted, "and that ticket was mine. He promised me half." Cameras swung toward her like bees to honey. Reporters lifted microphones, sensing the drama unfolding before the official ceremony even began. One of them called out, "Mr. Bennett, any comment on the family dispute surrounding the winnings?" Janet looked at me, her eyes questioning, unsure whether to delay the event or proceed. I took a deep breath and stepped out into the hallway. "Let's begin," I said quietly. The stage was modest, a backdrop with the Ohio Lottery logo, a giant check propped on an easel, and a podium with a microphone. I walked slowly, deliberately, each step feeling like I was shedding another layer of humiliation. As I reached the front, the flashes started. Dozens of camera bulbs popped, and murmurs spread through the crowd. I adjusted the microphone and looked straight ahead. "Thank you all for being here," I began, voice steady. "My name is Harold Bennett, and I am the verified winner of the $120 million Powerball jackpot." A pause. First, I'd like to address the noise surrounding this moment. There have been stories online, claims that the winning ticket was not mine, that promises were made, and lines were crossed. I'd like to clarify something publicly and once, so there's no confusion. I glanced toward the crowd where Tessa stood near the back, her arms crossed, Gerald whispering something in her ear. On Father's Day, my daughter handed me a lottery ticket. She called it a gift. She made a joke about splitting it if I won. But let's be clear, there was no agreement, no deal, no contract. The ticket was purchased with funds withdrawn from my own bank account, without my knowledge or permission. That same day, she gave another man, a man who is not her father, a $13,000 cruise using my money. That ticket was a gesture, not a bond. And until I saw the winning numbers on my television days later, it was trash in my garbage can. Literally. I looked out over the room. We don't always get to choose what reveals the truth in our lives. Sometimes it's something as small as a $2 joke. But when it pulls back the curtain on who people really are, it becomes more than luck. It becomes clarity. A hush fell over the room. Tessa's mouth opened slightly, like she wanted to say something, but no sound came out. The cabin was modest, perched on a hill that caught the morning sun just right, with a porch wide enough for 2 rocking chairs and a view that calmed the heart before the coffee ever touched your lips. I bought it 6 weeks after the ceremony, tucked away in a small town where people smiled without trying to figure out your net worth, and where no one cared if your name had been plastered across headlines for a brief, scandalous moment. I arrived with 2 suitcases, a truckload of donated books, and a heart still tender from betrayal, but no longer broken. The first few days were quiet, achingly so. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't answer the calls I still got from old neighbors or distant cousins who suddenly remembered I existed. I unpacked slowly, cleaned the windows, and planted a few flowers along the gravel path leading up to the steps. The silence wasn't empty, it was healing. I spent mornings writing letters to local organizations, offering funding to youth centers, shelters for single fathers, and food banks in need of renovation. I didn't sign them as Harold Bennett, the lottery winner. Just Harold, a man who understood what it meant to be alone and what it felt like to be seen again. My foundation didn't make the news. I made sure of that, but it made a difference. The first father I helped was named Marcus. He worked night shifts, raised 2 boys on his own, and slept in a van after losing his apartment. The day I handed him the keys to a 2-bedroom rental and a grocery card with no strings attached, he cried like a boy who hadn't been hugged in years. I didn't need his gratitude. His peace was enough. I funded dental work for a school janitor who hadn't smiled in photos since 1999. I helped a high school senior buy a laptop for college and watched her grow into a confident, eloquent woman who now ran the very youth program I first donated to. Their wins became mine. Quiet victories, not ones you post about, just ones you feel deep in your bones. Tessa didn't call. Not after the ceremony. Not after the press moved on. Her last message had been a scathing text I didn't bother reading in full. I deleted it the same day. I changed my number. I heard through someone, Walter, maybe that she and Gerald separated shortly after. Something about irreconcilable values. I didn't celebrate that. I didn't feel much at all. Anger takes energy. So does forgiveness. I chose distance instead. I kept the photo of her as a child on my mantle, the one where she's holding my hand at the zoo, cheeks stained with ice cream, eyes full of trust. That version of her never betrayed me. That version I still loved. The older one, the woman who weaponized the internet and my love against me. I left her behind, along with the noise, the pain, and the fantasy that family always means loyalty. One afternoon, a boy named Caleb knocked on my door. He was 6, full of questions and completely unafraid. His mother worked double shifts at the local diner, and he wandered sometimes. I gave him lemonade and let him name the bird that nested under my porch. We settled on Lou. Caleb came by often after that. He'd bring me pine cones, ask me if I'd ever seen a real sword, and tell me about the dragon he believed lived in the woods behind my cabin. One day, he looked up at me and said, "Are you somebody important?" I laughed and said, "Not really. just somebody who finally learned what matters. Hinata like that made perfect sense. In his company, I rediscovered something I thought I'd lost, a lightness. The ability to sit still without replaying old conversations or imagining better versions of them. I never remarried. I didn't reconnect with distant relatives. I didn't chase headlines or interviews. But I did walk into town every Sunday, have coffee with the same three retirees who argued about sports like it was a sacred ritual, and played checkers with a woman named June who never let me win. They didn't care about my past. They just welcomed my presence. The money sat in an account managed by a small firm I trusted. I used what I needed, gave what I could, and never once wished for more. I had enough. And that word, enough, became the core of my peace. I didn't need closure from Tessa. I didn't need apologies or second chances. I needed the sound of birds in the morning, the warmth of sun through my window, the quiet knowing that I had survived something meant to break me. And I did more than survive. I built something gentler in its place. On the 1-year anniversary of the win, I stood by the lake near my cabin and let the breeze wash over me. I closed my eyes and whispered thank you. Not to luck, not to fate, but to the man I'd become. A man no longer defined by what was taken from him, but by what he chose to give anyway. If you're hearing this now, wondering how my story ends, know this. It didn't end when the cameras stopped flashing or when the money arrived. It didn't end when my daughter walked away. It began when I stopped asking for love from people incapable of giving it. It began the moment I gave that love to the world instead. You don't always get the family you deserve, but sometimes in a quiet town, with strangers who become friends and a boy who believes in dragons, you find something better. You find peace. And peace, I've learned, is the greatest jackpot of all. The end. If my story meant something to you, if you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved or found yourself rebuilding from the ground up, go ahead and tap that like button. It helps more than you think. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Real stories about loss, justice, and finding peace in unexpected places. And before you go, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what part of the story hit you the hardest. Was it the lottery win or the betrayal that came before it? Or maybe it was the quiet at the end, the part where I finally found peace without needing anyone's approval. I'd really like to know.